Hey guys, Chris Dick here. Today I'm going to talk to you about Hadoop installation and configuration. Now we're going to be installing Hadoop on a Linux Ubuntu box. Now this box happens to be in Azure virtual machines. You may have it in any other place you like. You can choose Azure, Amazon, GCP. It really doesn't make any difference where it is because it's all going on Ubuntu. Now, we will be administrating some users. We'll be setting up some environment variables, setting up SSH, and establishing the prerequisites before we install Hadoop. Now, it's important to think this way because as we prepare our environment, this section is something that you will do consistently through each additional node that you add to your Hadoop cluster. Today we've got one virtual machine that we're working on, and that will create a single node cluster. So let's get started here. The first thing that we have to do is set up the environment. Now, I have a very quick set of commands here that I will run for upgrading or updating and upgrading packages. This will also turn off our unattended upgrades because we don't need that at the moment, and they often get in the way when we're trying to run installs. So if I copy that, actually, why don't we connect to our name node here? We'll go in through that. Now, if you're not familiar with connecting through WinSCP, I have several videos up, so feel free to browse those and learn how to connect through WinSCP. All right, now we're going to connect to a PuTTY session through WinSCP here. And we're just going to run the automatic updates, or let's say not automatic updates, but these are going to be the updates and upgrades. Now this takes a few seconds to do. My machine is fairly up to date as it is already. I have my machines configured to run these upgrades when they are installed. So these upgrades are already up and ready for our lesson. The next thing that we're going to do is secure the administrator account. Now, if you recall when you set up your virtual machine, I suggested that you make the administrator account Ubuntu, and you just want to set up a password if you haven't done so already. So I'm going to do that in this environment. Usually it just sets up with a blank password, and I'm going to set it to Ubuntu in this case. Okay, so that password has been set up successfully. The next thing we want to do is set up our environment variables for Hadoop. Now, I like to put everything into one place. You may have a bit of different preference. I create everything in a big data sh file, which sits in the profile D directory. And what this does is it will, when it launches, it will allow all of the users of this platform or this virtual machine to have access to the environment variables for the big data cluster in this case. Okay, and when we're setting it up, it will be referencing certain files so that we can come back to them later on. Now, in this case here, I am going to just copy this command set and go over to PuTTY, and I'm going to run that. So what that did was it created our file, which is this file right here. And if we go over into that directory, we will be able to find it. Let's just scroll down here, profile D, and there is our file. All right. So we'll just get out of that part. And let's just double check to find out what is actually in that file. We can do a cat on that, and it just shows us exactly what's in that file at the moment. You'll find it helpful to run that command fairly frequently, just to know what's actually there. As you add new environment variables to this file, it's also going to be very important to think ahead about what information is there. So for me, I like to reuse these environment variables, so I make sure that the information is always up to date. So you can see this is exactly what we're expecting. So because we made some changes to our environment, we need to reboot so that they get instantiated and we can confirm that we actually use those environment variables correctly. Now, when we are finished rebooting, we're going to echo those environment variables. So we just use this command here, and let's just see how we're doing with our startup process. Looks like we're back up. It's a very quick startup process, which is kind of nice. We'll copy this command, echo it, and there you have it. We have exactly what we were expecting to see. Okay, so let's move ahead. The next thing that we want to do is map out what our eventual cluster is going to look like. Now, you may only have a name node at this point. It's safe to add in as many name and data nodes that they have. What we have here in this first half is any of the DNS host names that you'll need. So in this one here, I've called it a name node. That's the actual name of the machine. You can see that right there. And then any additional data nodes, I might name them with the same similar naming convention. You see data node 001, 002, etc. The next part of this statement here talks about the IP addresses. In particular, this is the private IP addresses for your cluster nodes. So one of the things that I recognize as I add virtual machines to my cluster, it typically will reuse a similar IP set. So for mine, I know that it always sets them up like this. Yours may be very different, so just be aware that when you're using these variables, you're going to want to make a change. If yours is different, that is. So just be aware. If you're not familiar with how to get that, you can use these commands. So the DNS, if I want to find out what my DNS is, I just type in host name. Similarly, if I want to get the internal IP address, I type this and it gives me my IP address. So each node that you're setting up, you'll kind of want to know that information. So let's move forward. Now, how does this work here? Why is this important? This command set, what you'd want to do is load up a notepad and make the changes that you need as you go. Like your name node might be something very different. Okay, you can change any of these blocks. Once you've finished making your changes, copy that command and go into PuTTY and run those commands. Now, all that did was set up some temporary variables. And the reason is we're going to use those variables now to add the information about our cluster into the big data sh file. And we can do that just by running this command set. And again, your clusters might be different, so just be aware that this only goes to up to 4 data nodes. So if you need to add additional data nodes, you can just run a line similar to this, or and just change the variable information that's going into it. But the command will be very similar. So let's copy that command, and we're going to run that. And then let's just see what's actually in the file by using the cat statement. And it looks like our information, our cluster of variables are there. Okay. And again, these are just things that we're going to use later on. So let's move ahead. As you can see, this is exactly what we're expecting. We're going to reboot one more time because we've changed some environment information. And I'll just close that. And let's move down just a little further. Once we've rebooted, we want to just confirm that any of those variables actually took place, that they actually stayed with us. So we'll go back through here, we'll reconnect, and we'll go into PuTTY, go back over to our lesson, copy our echo, and you can test any of these really. So like 2, you see it's gone to 2. If I said name node Okay, so we know that everything is in there. May even want to test the IP address as well. And there we have it. Okay. Now this is just a copy of that information. It's not the actual information, so just be aware of that. Now, the next thing that we want to do is set up our passwordless SSH. I like to use config files and PEM files for this. So when you set up your virtual machine, typically on a cloud provider, they'll ask you to save a key pair file. So you should have that key pair file someplace. Most of the time it ends with the PEM extension. Yours may be different, but for most of them, Azure, Amazon, both use the same kind of system. So if you're not familiar with setting up the config files, feel free to step through this. But I'll go through this with you right now because I do have to set it up on this system. So we go into our SSH folder. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete this. This looks a little scarier than it is, but I'm going to delete what I have here, and I'm going to copy my PEM file over. Okay, so this is starting my SSH from scratch. I've got nothing available to it right now. I have to set my permission to 400 for my key pair file. And at the moment, I'm right at this phase right here. Okay, so I could have run that command. In fact, let's just give it a try. We'll do it right from our PuTTY session. If I do this, it would do exactly the same thing that I just did, and it would move ahead. Now, the next thing to do is talking about setting up the config file. Now, I already have one set up, and you could easily copy this into a text file and create the config file and place it wherever you like. I have my config file set up right here, and if you want to reuse some of those environment variables that we just set up, you can very easily set up your config file in exactly the same way that we've done right here. Okay, so pretty neat. So you can reuse this information and just run the file, and it'll create the config file just the same. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens here. So, oops, I've got 2 sessions open. I don't need 2 sessions open. So let's run that, and we'll refresh, and there's our config file. So let's find out what it says here. Now, the one thing that I do see that it does, and this isn't a bad thing so much, but you might want to just change it to that to be a little more generic. That way you can copy your config file around and reuse it anytime you like. But otherwise, we've got several nodes here all set up. Once again, you don't necessarily need these yet, but we will be reusing this information, and it's safe to keep it the way it is. It won't cause you any problems with your SSH. All right, so we'll close that config file. And what does it say here? It's telling me that my config file is set up as root. So this is also a really important thing to check out. Now, this is something that does happen, and I'm going to abort that for just a moment here because right now I need to just change my my permissions on that. So let's go ahead and do that. So chmod, and this one is a 664 permission set. And we're also going to change the ownership in a moment. So let's see, actually it's already at 664, so we'll just change the ownership. So we'll change it to Ubuntu, and we're changing the SSH config file ownership to Ubuntu, and that's right there. And we'll just run that. And you can see it kept it as root. So if you want to, that kept the group as root, that is. If you want to change them both so that they're the same, we can just do it like that. Okay, so you just change group and user, and there we have it. So now if I make any changes to config, which is something I did over here, again, just to make it a little more generic, you don't have to make that change, of course. And we'll just close that, and now our change should have taken effect. Let's just double check and see. Yep, it did. And there we have it. So our WinSCP has, it's already given us some security challenges, and you're going to see that come up from time to time. You just have to understand how to manage through that. So let's go forward here. Now that we know that we have our config file and PEM file set up, what we're going to do now is we're going to connect to our local host. Okay, local host being the computer that we're actually on, this virtual machine. Okay, so that will be a known host that it recognizes, and that's IP address 20.0.0.1. And we'll add that to our known hosts. We'll access out of that SSH session, and then I'm going to connect to NameNode, okay, which is also the same machine, just a different way of accessing. And you can see the IP address is different as well. Okay, so we'll do that. Now all this does is it just it avoids a few little warning messages that come up with Hadoop as you're starting the node for the first time, and they can get a little bit a little spooky when they come up, because you've done so much work to get to this point, and then all of a sudden you get weird errors or weird warnings as you're starting up your cluster. That's the last thing that you want to have happen at that point. So now that we know that we can SSH into ourselves, that's something that Hadoop really needs to have available. So let's move ahead here. All right, we've finished up our SSH. The next step is to install our Java Developers Kit. Now, we've already done the updates on the server, so that's fine. We can just move ahead here and simply install the JDK. So we'll run that. Now that takes a couple of minutes to do. I'll just talk about a few other things. So when we get our JDK installed, the next thing that we're going to do is add the Java home environment variable to our big data sh. Okay. And I can do that right now while Java is installing, and it's fairly easy to do. I already know that my directory that Java will be installed will be this. If you don't know what that is, you may want to just wait for Java to be finished installing, and you can decide or find out where your Java installation is. But I know that the default JDK is installed specifically to this location. So what I can do at this point is I can copy that, and that's going to take this just Java information and push it into our big data sh file. So it looks like we're done here. We just click, right click to paste our code in, and let's cat our big data sh, and we can see that our Java information is now there. Okay, so now that we know Java is installed and we've got a variable, what we also did there was we added Java to the path for our environment so that it knows where to find the Java executable. So if I type Java, it will know where Java is. Okay, so we will do a reboot here, because we changed some environment variables. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we'll just double check that Java was actually installed. We'll check that the version is up to date, etc. Your version may be different as we move forward. This at the point that I made this video, we were at 11.0.11. And that was on April 20th. So the next step, once we're ready, we're going to check the version, and we're going to make sure that we actually have an environment variable available to us. So looks like we're back in. Okay, I'll copy this command here, the java-version, and there we have it. We have a Java version just like we expected, and we'll check the Java home variable, and we have a Java home variable, so it is available. One other thing that you may see through these lessons is this snapshot notice. If your cloud provider has the ability of taking a snapshot or a backup at this point, go ahead and do that, just so that you've got most things saved and you're available to. If something goes wrong, you can back up and just go back to that point. Now, the next part of this lesson talks a little bit about Java Developer Kit for data nodes, and there's a different procedure for installing on data nodes. It's the same thing, so there's nothing really unique about it, but what I like to do is install everything from the NameNode, and this is just showing you how. So we're not doing that quite yet, but we will get to those lessons at another point. The next stage here is looking at pdsh. So pdsh helps Hadoop run multiple commands remotely in parallel. So it's an important feature for Hadoop to have installed. So we're going to install pdsh, and that doesn't take too long. It also requires an environment variable, so we'll make sure that we have that installed into our big data sh as well. We'll push that. Good. And let's do a cat on that just one more time, just to be sure. Big data sh, and there we have it. There's our environment variable for pdsh. Okay, now it asks us to reboot. It's a good idea to do that at this point because we did some updates. Very good. Now the next thing that we're going to install is rsync, and rsync will help us synchronize files between more nodes in the cluster, and they're really helpful it's a really helpful tool because it will, rather than copying an entire file set, it will look at the set and decide what's the most recent and decide whether it wants to push the files over or not. I find this really helpful when we make minor changes to the name node and have to synchronize those to the data nodes. So looks like we're restarted here. We'll go back over to our command, and we'll paste that into there, and it's a fairly quick install in this case because it's already installed on the system, but it's a good thing to have. It's suggested to reboot at this point, but because there was no changes, we can just easily move ahead. All right, so at this point we have an environment that is fully ready and prepared to receive a Hadoop installation. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. And remember to like and subscribe. Bye-bye.